Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, earlier this week it was announced that the Cabinet has approved plans to ease restrictions on pay and bonuses for bank staff, with banks now allowed to pay bonuses of up to €20,000 to their employees. In backing this decision, Minister Paschal Donohoe acknowledged that this approval may be perceived negatively, given the bank's checkered past, but also noted that these banks have 20,000 employees that look after €220 billion in deposits, and that good people are needed in these banks. I'm now joined by our resident economist, Marc Coleman. Marc, what is your assessment of this move?
Well, as we can see from Pierce Doherty's very well-timed and very politically shrewd intervention, it's a big issue for the government. The question is it going to be just a temporary Barney, or is it going to run until the next election? The government's logic is that now that the taxpayer is no longer bailing out the banks can go back to the pre-financial crash norms. That's an attractive point of view from the banks, but from a different logic, it's a little bit questionable. First of all, for many of us, the banking sector is more difficult to deal with now than it was in 2008. So a lot of people will be comparing the ease with which they could get credit, open a bank account, and generally deal with their banks on a relationship basis now with 2008, and the comparison is not a favourable one. Interest rates are much higher, so I guess the question is, what can the government do about that? Well, there are some things that it cannot do directly. What we need to understand is that a lot of the difficulty with dealing with the banks now is not the fault of the banks themselves. It's due to multi-layered regulations brought in that we don't have time to go into. But Paschal Donohoe is now president of the Eurogroup once again. He's been re-elected. So I think one thing he can do is engage with Europe to see how, for a fast-growing country with a young population like Ireland, and particularly for the SME sector, that the sins of the 2008 crash are not visited upon Ireland again, nor on the SME sector. So the logic behind the decision the government made is that the sins of the Anglo-Irish Bank way back when should not be visited on a new generation of CEOs of banks who didn't make those mistakes. And at a practical level, I think that the banks are going to have to engage much more with the public and communicate that a lot of this is coming from Brussels, from Frankfurt. But I also think they're going to have to look at the way their IT systems work. The staff rotation in banks is quite rapid. I think we're going to have to get as far back to relationship banking as we can in terms of more consistency of relationships with the banks, ease of getting credit. And it's absolutely crucial, Karl, because there are 1/3 small business owners who are going to be experiencing a tough time in the next year. And the banks are going to be the front end of that experience for them. And I'm afraid that if there isn't a radical change on that front, I think Sinn Féin won't just be making a point today. They'll be making a smash and grab on that vote in the run-up to the next election. What Paschal Donohoe can do is, as he's now, and I think this is good news for Ireland, he's going to be president of the Eurogroup once more. That's a very powerful position. I think he has to be talking to the big regulators, the single supervisory mechanism, the Commission, and he has to be saying, look, we can't drive the banking sector through the rear view mirror. Much of the regulation that was well intended and brought in 10 years ago is being applied in a one-size-fits-all manner that doesn't account for the fact that Ireland is a young country that needs to borrow more. We spoke about that last week. But also that the crucial SME sector that's going to suffer most from the interest rate rises coming down the tracks is a lot less risky than the commercial sector. It's a key point. You know, what caused the last crash was excessive lending in a concentrated sector, which was commercial property. But the SME sector is much more diverse, much less risky in aggregate, and, you know, much smaller operators. Your average hairdresser or your average newsagent who needs a loan for working capital is not the risk that Anglo-Irish Bank were 15 years ago. So Paschal Donohoe, I think, needs to be engaging with Europe on these issues. And the good news is that there was a Central Bank of Ireland, a very good Central Bank of Ireland conference some weeks ago at which there were very positive signals from both the Central Bank Governor, Paschal Donohoe himself, and also the European Commissioner for Financial Services, who is Irish, Mairead McGuinness, that I think these issues are going to be looked at. I think what Michael McGrath and Sean Fleming need to do, assuming that Michael McGrath is going to be Finance Minister and Sean Fleming will continue doing a very good job, I have to say, as Minister for Financial Services. They need to be sitting down with the banks and looking at what the banks can do to bring back as much of the positive relationship experience and just make it easier for people to get loans, set up banking. Of course, we need online for day-to-day transactions. But when you're starting a bank account or when you're getting a business loan, you need to be dealing with a human being, not an algorithm, not a series of online experiences that drive you around the bend, not making multiple phone calls and being sent from one call centre to another. You know, if the government want to justify a restoration of 2008 conditions on pay and bonuses for banking, they have to bring us closer to 2008 in terms of the experience and ease with which bankers, particularly the small business community, can do business with banks.
Well, that was Marc Coleman, our resident economist, and we look forward to hearing Marc's evaluation of topical economic matters next week.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.